Hey, CC friends, thank you for joining. This is going to be kind of the part two of our unit number 10, Intersected Lines. So, what I did is I just marked some pages in the complex pamphlet of things that would be good to especially focus on if you have a child that's younger and they're doing digits or naturals or fractions. I found that this packet for my kids, we made it almost all the way through. We often only function on a 3-day week, school week, because I teach Tuesdays. So getting that last day in on weekends is sometimes hard. But we normally at this point have been able to finish about 12 pages for my kindergarten kind of slash first grader doing the naturals, and then my third grader doing the fractions. We make it through about 12 pages a week, and a few times we made it through the whole 16. So I would suggest just work your way through it if you're doing either of those, and stop on areas of, there's areas where they could practice addition, basic multiplication. For the little ones, just illustrating what it is, even if you need to test them on their number knowledge. If they're looking at an angle, okay, what number is that? And they should be able to say 45. So then you teach them, and that little symbol just means degrees. Just teach them the basics. They're not going to grasp everything, but I know for my 5-year-old who absolutely loves art, she had so much fun in this because it's drawing and connecting dots and drawing angles. So have fun with it, and then just highlight those areas where you think might help them where they're at, whether they're really good at adding and subtracting, they need more practice, if they're just basic number recognition and you're focusing more on the tracing, or if they're a little older, maybe have never even seen decimals before in their old curriculum, you can take a few of the problems where there's decimals and actually teach them how to line them up and do the addition and subtraction on those, or multiplication of more than, like my daughter, she knows I'm like, oh, we have a song for that one. Like we'll say if it's 15 or below for the multiplication. But now we're getting into some things like 45 times 2. And I looked at her, I was like, oh, what are we going to do? We don't have a song. So we wrote it out as a multiplication problem so she could learn how to do that and then use her skip counting to multiply each digit. So have fun with that. But this is now going to focus in on the complex. And so on page one, I just put a star for everything. So there's the page one. And I say that because it's all basic. Now, is this all stuff that they would definitely learn in seventh grade? No. But I love how it relates to the clock. It teaches clockwise, counterclockwise. It's showing them, what a 90-degree versus a 45-degree looks like. They can even practice a little bit of their fractions and canceling some things out. And you'll see this repeated. It's literally teaching them conversions from degree measure to radian measure. And I'll talk about this a little bit. I'm going to do just a brief video on like the circle and what this is getting into. It's beginner trigonometry, but to know that we all have sang the song, the circumference of a circle equals 2 times pi, 3.14 times the radius. Okay, so we've learned that. They've been singing that for a while in CC, but the circle, if we have a circle with a radius 1, we often will see pictures of degree measures from a very young age, but we don't learn what's called radian measure sometimes until pre-calculus. Radian measure is just the distance around the circle. So a lot of what you're seeing, they're relating your degree measure to your radian measure to your revolutions. Like one revolution around the circle is 360 degrees, or 2 pi radians, as we would call it, because if the radius is 1, it's 2 times pi times 1. So we would talk about that distance as 2 pi. So I'll break that down a tiny bit more in another video. But anyway, page 1 is great. Page 2, this top part here, if they've never graphed lines, it kind of popped out of nowhere. And as I looked at it, I was like, that could be something that they look at in the answer key and do, but they won't necessarily know how to just graph this line and then shade. But, I put it as like a question mark. You could do it or not do it. There's further in there, it talks about slopes and intercepts and how to graph lines. say you don't have to focus on that if they're feeling stressed about it, or it could be something to go back to once they see some of the other pages. But this part here is neat. It talks about scale factors. They're going to be doing things with maps. So it's really kind of a good comparison. And then there's some just good practice with plotting points. What would that look like if you have a scale 1 to 20? So some critical thinking in there. I thought that was neat. Um, and then even the next part, segments and angles. This is basic geometry. So again, like would they be having geometry in seventh grade? No. But all this stuff it's fairly basic. So don't be intimidated by it. If you need to look in the key, do it. But it's good just for them to identify. Um, Page 3 teaches explementary, supplementary, and complementary angles. So that's a good thing for them to learn those definitions. And they can again practice, hopefully they're good with addition, subtraction, things like that. But if they need to work on that and lining up their place values, maybe they can do things really well in their head, but now we're getting to higher levels of math, and sometimes it is good to write it down and follow the process. So I encourage you to have them work on that. And again, with this, I feel like everything in this unit is pretty straightforward compared to some of the very advanced stuff that was in the other units. So just because I'm highlighting a few things, if they're having fun and just working right on through and learning parallel, perpendicular, that's great. It's all very valuable information. But I'm just showing you some areas that might be really good for them that they can also practice other skills. So on page 4, there's plotting points and then identifying the coordinates of points. Hopefully you can see that. And then this part here, we're adding segments and talking about it. So again, just some good areas where they can practice, the order of operations here with the distance formula, but they're not having to set the whole thing up because can be a very tricky concept, but they're getting introduced to that while they're working their other math skills. So I highlighted those two spots especially. And even the bottom talking about angle type, this is where they're really breaking down your different types of measures of angles and how we convert between those. So, um, page 5, I highlighted the first part where it says protractors. Protractors are a great tool for them to really see how to measure an angle, how it's measured. So I encourage you to get one if you don't have one and let them try some of this. Terminal side, initial side is where it starts, terminal is where it ends. Is it going clockwise, counterclockwise? So that whole page really covers that. But especially that first part. And then even there's intersection of lines and so again, do what they're comfortable with, but that whole page is great too. Then I even put down here for page 6, it has again where you're graphing the lines. So this can be something that they could look at in the key if they don't know how to do that. And shading, it's kind of taking it that next notch because there's this process happening where we do the first 4 or pages, second 4, and so it increases in how advanced it gets. So that's your next progression of that. Here, the distance formula, again, that's what this is called, in case you didn't know. And it's teaching them that process of working these equations. So these are cool things for them to complete. And then down here, I put a note, decimal addition, subtraction. So maybe they're still struggling with remembering we got to line up the decimal places, So this is a good spot. Make sure they know how to do that on paper and not just on a calculator. So they can be adding these measures. Same thing with the degrees. Just, it could be a quick little quiz for them, but they're also learning how that works for angles and line segments. Page 7. It's just showing more with slopes of lines. So I did put a star here because this actually teaches them how to write the slope. It's the change in y over the change in x, and it's kind of teaching them the basics. So I think this would be good to work through. and matching complementary and supplementary angles, a little bit of critical thinking. We have to add them up to be 90 or add them up to be 180. So it kind of enlists that brain to be doing the critical thinking skills there. And then even here, just the tiles installer, a little word problem. It's just showing them how does this stuff relate to real life. So all that stuff is great too. And then we pass over to page 8. A lot of the things I highlighted from here on out are all the same. Page 8, we have y intercepts. Where does the line, what point does the line intersect with the y axis? And just writing down those points and things. More with what is perpendicular, what is parallel, some more breakdowns of different angles, conversions. So it's just moving right through that progression. Again, I love really how they did this unit. Page 9, just another version kind of the other page with angle measures. Do what you feel comfortable with. If you're running short on time trying to get through things, you can jump right over to page 10. And especially down here, again, just some critical thinking skills in terms of which ones are equal, greater than, less than. Nice review over things like this number phi, which is approximately 1.618. It's an irrational number. And then you have pi, you have the square root of 2. So there's different things going on here that would be good to just review and at least look in the answer key if nothing else. Things about parallel lines. Again, that distance formula, this is just huge for them to see that whole process multiple times, because it is very important when they get in higher levels of math to understand it. But right now, just to be introduced to it and working that process. I love this part on page 12. It really is outlining equations of lines. That standard form y equals mx plus b is something they'll have to memorize in algebra. So as they're seeing the breakdown of this with lines and getting to actually do it, it's awesome for them to be practicing that in advance. And then more with angle breakdowns and so forth. And that's pretty much it. It just keeps continuing through. There's some nice reviews of, your obtuse angles, straight angles, reflex angles. This is on page 13. Great visual for them if they're kind of struggling with what are these different names of angles and what are parallel, perpendicular, oblique lines, coincident lines. They just fall on the same line. And then finally, the one thing I thought was really neat in the end, and again, a lot of these things repeat, but I gave you some good ideas of what I think would be good for them to especially focus on, unless they're just flying through, then have them do the whole thing. So this bottom part here, hopefully you can see on page 16, the last page, is neat because you're inputting values in. You're practicing your algebra or your arithmetic skills, your order of operations, but it's also beginning stages of teaching them how to deal with variables and functions. So that's on the bottom of page 16. And then naturally, the careful calculations, I think, would always be great for them to just kind of do near the end. Whatever you completed in the packet, have them do that and work through it and see how they feel about it. If they are confident with everything or some of it, just let them give it a shot. So hopefully that helps a little bit. Again, this was a great unit. Hopefully it's a slight change of pace because some of the concepts had gotten very advanced, but these are all things that would be fun to work through with your student, and hopefully you enjoy it. So thank you for tuning in. I'll do a few more videos on some of the specifics, formulas, and such, and have a great day.